And I do believe we are live here tonight on AITQR Mini Mic. We're also broadcasting this live on Panda Mic for any of you that are Panda Mic fans. But right now, I would like to introduce you to our guest this evening. His name tag does say Rose Knightley, but trust me, his name is Robert Knightley. So, Robert Knightley, after college and the Army, joined the New York City Police Department in 1967. He patrolled the streets of Manhattan and Brooklyn for 18 years during the time of the Knapp Commission on police corruption. He knew the reformer, Frank Serpico, who I had the pleasure of meeting at Robert's 70th, and the notorious Prince of the City, Robert Leuci. In 1989, Robert Knightley joined the New York City Legal Aid Society in the criminal defense system. But that's all we're going to do tonight, because there's another 30 years after that of crime fighting, crime fiction, pilot scripts for Aaron Spelling, and much, much more. So if you stick around, you'll get the schedule, because we're going to have 3 of these interviews with Robert. He's 80 years old, and he has some incredible stories to tell. But this evening, we're going to take him right back to his childhood, his early formative days of journalism, joining the police force, and then retiring from the police force to become a criminal defense lawyer. So let me introduce you to Robert Knightley. Let's give him a pin. Mr. Knightley, good evening.
Evening, Carrie.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It really is a pleasure and a great honor to have you. I know you are a busy man. At 80 years old, you are still working thoroughly in criminal defense, and you are currently located in Albany, correct?
Right.
What's it like in Albany these days?
Quiet and empty.
And you lived in Queens for many years.
I did. I lived in, I was born and grew up in Brooklyn. I lived in Manhattan for a number of years, and lived in Queens for 13 years, and left from Queens. We left from Queens for Albany.
So, Robert, where were you born?
Brooklyn, Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
And I'm going to share the screen and go through a couple of photos. We're going to break the screen up, but right now we're going to go over to some rather special photographs of Robert's childhood. And I'd like you to meet Robert at school. Robert, tell us a little bit about this photograph.
This is a class photo of St. Anthony's Juniorate, which is a high school for boys who intend to become, to go on to become teaching brothers in the Franciscan order. It lasts from first to fourth year of high school. It was in Smithtown, Long Island, and this picture is taken in 1955.
Wow, and I'm circling Robert. How old were you in this photograph, Robert?
13.
Goodness me, you are tall as well. Right, let's skip over to the next one. Okay, this is absolutely adorable, everybody. I have cheated. I have seen these photographs. Look at that hairdo, will you, everybody? Check it out. Look at that coif. Okay, how old were you here?
Pardon?
How old were you here?
13.
13. Was this a very formative period for you with the Franciscan brothers?
It was. It was my first time away from home, away from Greenpoint, Brooklyn. This was in the North Shore of Long Island, Smithtown, and I enjoyed it very much. I was there for 2 years till I left by mutual agreement.
By mutual agreement. Okay, that's a story unto itself. Robert, who brought you up?
My aunt and grandmother raised me. That's my paternal side in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where they lived. My mother left me there when I was a year old with my aunt and grandmother. She was only 18 at the time. She knew I'd get good care. and she had her own problems at the time.
Were you able to resume a relationship with her at any point in time?
No, I only saw her 2 times after that. When I was in my, well, when I was in my 20s, and she was hospitalized in Elmira, New York, for terminal cancer.
Right.
We never had a relationship beyond that.
Well, from the stories that I've read about your grandmother and your aunt and some of your mystery writings, it sounds like you were very loved and very wanted. Let's put it that way.
I believe that.
Yeah. Right. So let's get back to these photographs because there's a few more delightful ones here. Okay, moving on. And I have to get a little bit tinier with this. There you go. I'm going to go over to the next one. Okay, everybody, this is the most delicious photo of the century. I'm sorry, just take a moment. Look at the background. You'll all recognize it. Robert, your Sunday best. We want to know your age, what you were doing here, what this photograph is about. It's just sublime.
This is Easter Sunday. I can tell by the new suit and top coat. I probably have already gone to church at St. Anthony of Padua church, connected to the school that I graduated from. And that same school employed my grandmother as the cleaning lady, which she was there for as long as I was and beyond. This is the rooftop of our tenement building, six family building on Oakland Street in Greenpoint. And how old am I? Well, this is before graduation. I graduated in 54, so this would be 52, 53.
You do look like a little bit of a rebel. I hope you understand that.
Well, I didn't know that.
Were you religious?
I was while I was in that school. I guess I grew out of it by the time I reached college.
Right. Robert, we're going to jump. Tell us how we got here, because this is Puerto Rico, correct?
San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm in the Army. I'm a draftee in the Army. I pushed up my draft after college so I could get it out of the way. This is after basic training at Fort Dix. And I was expecting to go to either Korea or Germany. And I was anticipating cold winters. When the orders came down, I was slated to go to San Juan, Puerto Rico. I was the only one I knew that was going there.
Now, was it in Puerto Rico that your passion for journalism started?
I guess it was because it was a day job. I was an English language instructor for, there was a school there, an Army school for native Puerto Rican recruits to be taught a basic conversational English course. And I was there as an English instructor along with seemed like every other college graduate that year from basic training. There must have been over 100 of us. All kinds of graduates. There were electrical engineers, classics professors from Harvard and Yale, and people like me, and a couple of journalists.
So do you recall what your first couple of professional stories were?
What do you mean?
As a journalist, do you record your first published stories?
Oh, yeah. It was after the Army. I was employed as a reporter, writer, editor, and on Drug Topics newspaper.
No.
Yeah, a business magazine, very, very lucrative. And I would interview, the audience was drugstore owners, pharmacists.
Right.
I would interview pharmacists, and the photographer would take pictures. I remember we The first one, I was on the cover of the newspaper. It's quite big, the newspaper. With the German shepherd, the drugstore owner had employed, just hired and employed to keep his store safe. This was in the mid to late 60s.
Right. So can we take you back a little bit to actually joining the police force in New York, which was in 1967, correct?
Right.
All right. So how did this come about?
Well,
I mean, you don't just like, oh, I'm just going to be a policeman. What happened?
No, in fact, I never crossed my mind to be a policeman. I came out of the Army in I was in the Army from 1961 to 63. Came out of the Army in the summer of 63. And I was employed as a copy boy in the New York Journal-American for about a year. Then the newspaper went out of business. The Journal-American closed its doors. I was looking for work. I worked a while for that's when I went into the business journalism. And it wasn't, it didn't suit me. It bored me, in fact. So I looked around, and my Irish grandmother advised me. She said, Bobby, take the police test. It's a steady job with a pension. And I left, but I took the test and scored high. And before I knew it, I was in the New York City Police Academy in 1967, May of 67.
So in those early days, one of your beats was the East Village, around the Square Park area. Give us a little treat. Take us back to that time. Can you describe a little bit about what it was like being on a beat back then in Tompkins Square Park in the East Village? A lot of us are implants. We weren't born here, or we weren't around in the early 60s in New York City, and it's a real treat just to hear a little bit more about that from the viewpoint of a policeman.
Well, my first assignment was to the 9th precinct on East 5th Street, between 1st and 2nd Avenues in the East Village. And I was a rookie patrolman. And in those days, you were assigned to a foot post, meaning you walked a designated area of the precinct. I remember often I was down on Avenue B or C or D, between Houston Street and 8th Street, St. Mark's Place. And you walk a 4 or 5 square block area. Yeah, I remember being on this dead end street on East 5th Street between Avenues B and C, and walking. It was early evening. And then I walked around the corner to to 6th Street off Avenue C, and everybody was in the middle of the street yelling and fighting. and I realized that I was supposed to do something about that. So I rushed in the middle. I rushed. You couldn't get to the middle. I was on the end yelling to stop or some such thing, and not hitting anybody. Nobody was hitting me. We were hitting at each other. And I got on the radio and called it into the precinct. And, we carried a radio in those days.
You didn't carry guns back then, right?
Oh, sure, we had guns. Sure, but
I'm from New Zealand. The police weren't allowed near guns until I think 2000 and something, and then I was in England where they only had batons. So I'm never sure about the rules.
We had batons, and we had. I had my baton on, but I had nightstick, we called it.
Right.
I didn't have a gun out. The last thing in the world, it never occurred to me to take a gun out. In those days, most of my contemporaries, they didn't think gun right off the bat unless somebody was pointing a gun at them. The last thing in the world you wanted to do was to fire your gun. Considering Yes.
Was that to do with the training? Were you trained in a different way than they're currently trained?
We were trained that you can use a gun in order to save your own life or the life of another. You had to be threatened with deadly physical force. It was very thorough training. And God, you didn't want to shoot somebody who wasn't guilty of that kind of threat. If you did, you had legal problems galore, and you had problems from the police department that employed you as well.
And the chokehold, the one that's been so deadly these last years, was that something that was legal at the time back then in your day?
Well, nobody was making an issue of it in those days. It happened, it goes back forever. I remember people being arrested during a fight with a patrolman. And I remember one in the Bronx and one in Brooklyn. And in the course of subduing, the officer choked him to death.
Right.
And it was not regarded as a criminal act, as an unnecessary act. There was no regulation against it, and it was not. All an officer would do was say that he felt his life was in danger, meaning that if he was overpowered, whoever overpowered him could take his gun and kill him.
Mm-hmm.
So, which authorized any kind of action to resist. That's not so today. That's not the state of the law today either.
No. No, and thank you for taking us back to that period of time and explaining it to us. I think a lot of people would really appreciate hearing what it was like back then. Robert, the 1977 were the big blackout, correct?
Yes.
And riots. Where were you during that time?
I was in the middle of it, and at the time I was assigned to the 83rd precinct, which covered Bushwick, Brooklyn. Bushwick became one of the epicenters of the riots and the looting and the arson. That night, it started in the evening on July 13th. And I was off duty, and I heard the call to come in. We're all summoned to come in to our precincts. Well, actually, to the nearest precinct. But at the time, I was living still in Greenpoint, and the local precinct was a rather sedate place. They didn't need me in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. They needed me in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which was only 5 miles away. So I jumped in my car and rode there. It was quite a ride, since there was no light at all. Traffic lights were on, street lights were out. There was no light, period. When I got there, everything was crazy. We got our uniforms on, went in a police car, and headed for Broadway, which was the locale of all the looting. I was there for most of the next, all of that night and most of the next day. The riot went on for 2 days and 1 night. At the end of it, it was happening in the Bronx and Manhattan, as well as Brooklyn and Queens. At the end of it, 3,000 people have been arrested. I myself arrested 10 during that night, and they were all taken to the local, to the precinct cells and kept there until they could be taken to central booking, as it was called.
Were you scared?
No, it wasn't time to be scared. Besides that, when you're as young as I was, you don't think about mortality. In fact, you kind of proceed as if you're immortal. Scared? No, it wasn't time to be scared. You reacted to what was going on around you. The interesting thing is, I don't recall hearing a gunshot. I don't recall anybody using their weapons what we used was our nightsticks. And there were thousands of people on Broadway, this commercial center of Bushwick, and Bedford-Stuyvesant across the way. Thousands of people poured into Broadway to loot, and eventually started to burn the businesses. At one point, they were on the street. There were thousands of people, and they were either looters, firemen, or policemen. That's all there were.
What an experience.
It was unique.
I had a very mini version of it with the Brixton riots in 79, 80, 81 in London.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was given a weapon to defend myself in a store that I was meant to work in during the height of the riots, which I just thought was the most ridiculous thing ever. It was, it was a really heavy time. But when you understand why they're rioting and somebody's trying to give you something to defend yourself against it, and you just want to disappear into a wall as a little white woman, it was a strange time. Robert, I'm going to share some more photographs of you in the police force. So let's get ready, folks. This is good stuff. Okay. We're going back over to our favorite share screen. I'm getting faster at this. Look at that. And we're moving to... Here we go. All right. Robert's in the police force. I can't say he's looking particularly excited about his job. Robert, talk to us.
Oh, it was a great job. This is 1960, 69 or 70. And I've just been assigned to as a reporter to the police magazine, Spring 3-100 is the title. It had been going on, the magazine had existed since 1939. And it was a magazine, a trade company magazine, except it was written, photographed, produced by patrolmen, only patrolmen. The editor was a patrolman, and all the writers were patrolmen. I was among the newest, and that was my desk and my typewriter. And we worked in plain clothes. We worked out of 400 Broome Street, which was known as the police annex. It was across the street from police headquarters, which at that time was at 240 Center Street in, I guess that was Soho, or the border of Soho. I was there for 3 years.
3 years. And what was the quality of the writing from the patrolman, in your opinion?
Excellent. Because the writing was about the nitty gritty of police work. I remember one particular column, which I wrote for a time. It was All in the Day's Work, it was called. And it was item after item of arrests and violence and human interest stories and rescues. And it was contributed by each precinct had a precinct reporter. And they all sent in their reports from their local precincts. And there were 75 precincts in New York City, covering the 5 boroughs. So it was full of action.
Do you have any copies of that still in your archives?
I do. I have 3 bound copies of that time.
You know what? For one of the following interviews, we'll scan a couple of them and let's get into it. We'll sort of reference some of the writing. I think this would be really interesting to take a look at all these years later. We're skipping over to the next photograph. Patience with me, everybody, while we constantly back and forth. But if I share the screen for too long, we don't get to see Robert's face, and that becomes a little sad. So here we go. And now we are moving on to, I won't say it's the highest quality, but it's a really beautiful photograph of a trip that Robert took to Ireland. We're just jumping ahead just a few years. Robert, talk to us about this, because this goes back to your grandmother who brought you up, and your auntie, and your roots, and your schooling, and everything the formative years that we touched on earlier on in this interview.
Yeah,
And whose graveside you're actually standing on. I'm going to enlarge it, everybody. As I said, it's not the greatest quality, but it speaks volumes.
this is the grave of William Butler Yeats, the famous Irish poet. His grave is at the foot of Bulben Mountain in County Sligo. This is 1982. My aunt Mary and myself went to Ireland to look for our roots, and we found them. We found my grandfather's people in County Kerry, in the town of Castle Gregory, and there, and we found my grandmother's connections in County Limerick.
That must have been very moving.
It was incredible. It was kind of ordained. It seemed like the Irish Airline did us a genealogy chart and sent us to. We had no details. They sent us to where the Knightley name was common, and it was in County Kerry. And we just happened to stay in Castle Gregory. I remember at a B&B. I remember asking the woman who ran it with her husband if she'd ever heard of the Knightleys. And her husband was a retired doctor, and she said, he delivered all of them. And she gave us the direction to the farm where my grandfather was born in 1875.
Oh, Robert, it must have been so moving. Goodness me.
It was incredible. We had the same experience in Limerick Island, in the village, the village of Cooner outside Limerick, where my grandmother grew up, one of 9, dirt poor.
Right.
She was a servant girl, farmed out to a richer family, and the name was Grimes. Her name was Grimes, and we found her people too.
Wow, it's very moving. I'm going to throw a silly little story in here because it does have some relevance and it will make you laugh. But my relatives went back to Ireland looking for our people with Beehans, Beehan, which can be spelt several ways. And they ended up in some small town in County Cork. And there was a bar and there was a cafe. And my uncle and his wife went into the cafe to get some coffee. And the bar owner asked them what they wanted, and they said they wanted coffee, and he said he was sorry, but they weren't serving coffee, and they needed to go to the bar next door, and there they could get some information on the Beehans. So they left the cafe and went out the door, and in the door of the bar, and the same guy came through another door into the bar, and then asked them again what they wanted, and then served them some coffee.
I found that no matter what town you went into in Ireland, ultimately you ended up in a bar.
Right. Yeah. Anyhow, that kept us laughing for a long time. All right, here we go. This is our last photograph for tonight, folks. I told you he's interesting, and this is just the beginning of a extended series with Robert because he's written several books. He was the president of one of the chapters of the Mystery Crime Writers Club in America. He, as I said, is still a practicing criminal defense lawyer with some incredible stories about who he's been representing of late. And we're going to get into that in the next 2 interviews. But right now I want to share this rather precious photograph with you. It's our last one for the evening. Oh, I'm getting good at this. Come on. And here we go. There you go. Yes, I know it's literally so hard to view. There's not a lot of shape in there, but just take some time, stare into this fuzzy image because that is Robert Knightley in the St. Patrick's Day parade. He does have a fat cigar in his mouth. He's obviously having a party. Robert, tell us about this photograph.
This is the St. Patrick's Day. Don't know what year, maybe 81, like it says. In any case, it's after the parade. Everybody I knew who was Irish put on the uniform and went to the parade on Fifth Avenue and marched. We marched from 45th Street up to 86th Street, and it ended there. And you went south after that, after the parade, and hit every Irish bar along the way from 86th Street all the way down to the 20s.
Right.
For as long as you lasted. And this was the primary party of the day after the parade. The Irish Association, had their annual bash at a Greek church at St. Gregory's, I think it was. And that's occurring at that church, and loaded, hundreds of cops, male and female, and after that, who knows what happened.
And it was quite the drinking culture back then, wasn't it?
Oh, it was indeed.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some stories, and I do understand that within the drinking culture, there was also quite a few problems with the cops.
Oh,
but,
there was indeed.
Yeah, but that's another story.
Quite a few.
Oh, there are. Robert, could we just touch on, oh my God, the time's already gone. This is not fair. Can we touch on Serpico during the Knapp, the Knapp Commission, which basically exposed corruption in the police force?
Yeah.
And Serpico, who reformed in many ways, he was a reformer in the police force. And like I said, I met Serpico at your 70th birthday party, which was 10 years ago. I was super excited. I remember the movie from the 70s. We're going to go over a little bit. I just love you to tell us a little bit about the Knapp Commission and when you were active with in the time of Serpico, and just a little bit about how the corruption affected the police force around you, if you actually had a personal connection or some kind of interplay during that time.
Well, I joined in 1967. The Knapp Commission happened in 1970-71. Serpico testified in 1971. So I was there pre-Knapp and post-Knapp. The Knapp Commission and all the efforts to reform the police department actually succeeded. It was a different police department. You wouldn't recognize it 10 years later, 1980. What I remember about pre-Knapp, 67 to 70, all that a patrolman like myself, a rookie, mind you, ever experienced was what older cops let them see. It was a big deal in those days to ride in a radio car. There were older cops were assigned to every tour riding a radio car. A designated area, it was called a designated sector, it was called their sector. And they knew everybody in it, and they didn't necessarily shake people down, but they were rewarded amply by businesses particularly in Manhattan. Particularly around 14th Street. I remember riding around that one tour as the recorder, and the regular guy was the driver in that radio car. And I remember him driving around all 14th Street onto 3rd Avenue and going a little way down and getting out of the car and going into a bodega, a retail store, and coming out, he got back in the car, and he said, "Here, this is yours," and it was 13 $1 bills. Now, obviously, he collected regularly from this store. Of course, I was not expecting it. That not happened to me before. My reply, no thanks, you know. And he said, take it. And by the manner and his speech, I knew that it was not, it just wasn't wise to say no. So I simply took it. And most did, really. If you didn't want it, and others did, and they were older than you and more experienced, and they said, take it, you did. Because if you didn't, your name was mud among those policemen in that prison. You were marked down as a rat, a possible informer. And since most of the cops are Irish, the tag of informer was a terrible thing to live with.
Right. And it must have been hard being a young rookie to sort of fight back.
Well, the only plus was that you saw very little of it on a grand scale. You saw little stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it went much further than that. It went right up the line.
Right.
And it had gone on for years and years. Serpico had a big hand in changing all that. Now, Serpico was not a reformer. He was just a guy you weren't going to push around. You weren't going to insist. Now, if that cop said to him, take it, he would not have. He would have taken whatever problems came along with saying no. And that's what he did all along.
And the rest the rest is public information, and
That's
made
right.
the most amazing suspense-driven movie. And I had the great honor of assisting you on your editorial. You edited Queen's Noir, which was a series of books. And when we were going through lots of the transcripts, it was just such a privilege to read a lot of this material. So there's so much more that we're going to touch on as it all comes back to me now about the days when we were putting together your Brooklyn Noir selection. Robert, our time is up, over. I can't believe it. We will pick up where we left off. I'm going to be bothering your wife, Rose, for more photographs. She's going to curse me because she thinks she's given me everything that you two have, but I want more, because I know our viewers, when our viewership grows, which of course it will, having somebody like you telling us this story, we'll want to see more photographs. So tell Rose, you've got homework. We need more photographs, even if you scan them out of books. But for now, I would like to say, Robert, you made a comment to me the other day with regard to you felt something along the lines that everything you ever did, everything you ever learned, all your studies, all your path was really about collecting material, because at heart, it's the writer in you that expresses himself. Would I have formulated that correctly?
I've come to that belief over time. I didn't know it at the time, but I believe it's true.
And this is what we are going to explore over the next couple of interviews. We're going to explore your literature and, as I said, your current criminal defense work, which is fascinating. So for part one of AITQR Mini Mike, I would like to thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's really been an honor to have you. Look forward to having you back very shortly for part two. And I'm just full of gratitude. What more can I say?
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Okay, I'm Carrie Beehan, and I'm the founder. Oh, one closing remark. Why is Robert on the show? Robert's on the show because he script consulted the AITQR script. He is also a fabulous copy editor. So that's how he got to be on the show. But like I said, we've worked together for a long period of time prior to that. All right, it's good night from me, and I thank you all for viewing. Thank you, Robert.
Good night, Gary.
Good night. Bye-bye.